Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. As you probably hear, I'm having a very bad cold. So yesterday I had no voice, today I have some voice. So let's see how it goes. So, as our moderator said, I work for a Swedish pension fund called the Third National Pension Fund, usually known as AP3. And as a reasonably asset manager, actually we are the smallest fund here present, but still as a reasonably large fund. Our assets about 21 billion euros. We are, of course, very much affected by the recent debt crisis. We feel the asset price volatility in our daily life, and our performance can be hurt. However, for us, the longer run is even more important. Making rational portfolio choices is difficult when the visibility of the world economy is unusually low. Every day we struggle with many questions regarding the possible paths that the markets may take. Will the crisis affect the global economy in a way that makes it more difficult for us to deliver? Our long-term target is 4% real return. It sounds as a low target, but it's not. On the contrary, we are quite concerned whether we will be able to produce returns in par of our target. At least it will not be a trivial task. Let me now go back a few months in time, to early May. The Economist magazine had a front page mimicking the poster of the notorious cult movie Apocalypse Now. The title got twisted into Acropolis Now. The government debt of Greece was certainly the topic of the month. The 10-year Greek bond yield had been rising alarmingly and reached double-digit levels in May. Also, the spreads of Portugal, Ireland, and Spain rose quickly. These countries were soon grouped together, and the acronym PIGS became popular, probably reflecting success of every investor's favorite acronym, BRIC. The eagerly awaited news of the large EU and IMF rescue package managed to calm the market, and the worst worries were over, at least for that time. To understand the chain of events during the spring, it's useful to digress into two topics. Firstly, into Greek modern history, and then into a theme that we could call market microstructure. 10 years ago, in early 2000, the Republic of Greece issued a very well-received 10-year bond. The outstanding amount was big, equivalent of about 9 billion euros. The bond was so successful that the Euromoney publication ranked Greece as the European issue of the year. When the maturity date of the bond was approaching, the markets grew more and more uncomfortable. Would Greece be able to roll over its debt? A few very nervous weeks followed before the rescue package was in place. In the world of global finance, the Greek government debt is tiny and peripheral and would normally not make the headlines. And Greece is not the only country in the world struggling with high public debt, far from it. Therefore, I don't want to spend too much time focusing on Greece. However, the story of this particular Greek bond shows how something seemingly unimportant in the global context can trigger events of great impact. And I will come back to this point later. We know now that what started as a Greek liquidity crisis developed into full-scale confidence crisis, not only for Greece, but for the whole euro area and even beyond. A very fundamental question was posed during the spring. Is the whole Western world over-indebted? Unfortunately, the answer is probably yes. We know from empirical research that high public debt levels seems to slow down growth. In many countries we have reached, or are about to reach, the threshold where this could happen. According to Rogoff and Reinhard, the critical level could be somewhere around 90% of GDP. Now, was it a surprise that Greece and many other European countries were running such high level of government debt? Definitely not. Every economist covering Europe could have reminded us of some basic facts. They could have told us that the public debt to GDP ratio in Greece exceeded 100% already in 1993. That's 17 years ago. The debt had risen quickly during the 80s as the country was rebuilding its public sector after years of military dictatorship. The Swedish welfare state was actually used as a model in this project. Unlike Sweden, the whole project was financed through borrowing, hence two mistakes were made. The first mistake was the populist misconception that the ballooning public sector could be financed without tax hikes. Sounds like having one's cake and eating it too. The second, but related problem was the increasing ineffectiveness of the public sector, as if a big public sector had become an entity in itself. Let me then digress into the market's role in this spring's events. There are a few features in today's markets that might strengthen the likelihood of big price movements. The first one is our instantaneous access to information, combined with our ability to only focus on a few themes at the same time. We could call this information funneling. We all use the same data sources. A piece of news on Bloomberg, CNBC, Wall Street Journal, or Financial Times reaches all of us at the same time. The story, if interesting enough, is cited and retold in media over and over again. The message gets amplified and seems to grow in importance. This is the way the news, well, the old news of Greek debt ended on the table of every fund manager in a matter of days. A few more days and the story had been transformed into a story about the viability of euro as a currency. A few weeks went by and the story had been replaced by another one. It was the US economy's turn to be in focus. The second feature is how leverage can amplify price swings. Derivatives as a tool for transferring risk are great financial innovation. However, the increased use of derivatives is not without problems. As the amount of risk transferred in OTC contracts remain quite opaque, the transparency of the global finance system is not good enough. Certain types of derivatives, at least in unregulated OTC form, may weaken the stability of the financial system, make it more prone to large price swings. Whenever and wherever financial crises are discussed, the Swedish banking crisis in the early 90s is mentioned. So working for a Swedish pension fund, let me say something on this topic. In 1985, the Swedish Central Bank decided to relax the regulation on bank lending. Almost overnight, the banks were free to lend as much as they wanted. A huge increase in real estate-related borrowing followed. Real estate prices rose quickly, and in the early 90s you could talk about a bubble. Eventually, as most bubbles, this one burst too. Interestingly, a media-related event could have been the needle. During a conference hosted by a media house, a well-known professor predicted that the real estate prices would fall by 30 to 40%. After that event, several players started to offload their holdings, and indeed, prices started to fall. Commercial real estate fell by more than 70% in Stockholm area. Several of the big banks needed to be recapitalized as a consequence. And as you know, some years later, the Swedish krona was devalued, but that's really another story, part of the broader European currency crisis. What's interesting in today's context is the government response to the crisis. Admittedly, the economic environment of the early 90s was different from today's. Still, some useful lessons can be learned. One of the most important tasks in managing a crisis is rebuilding of confidence, both internal confidence and external confidence. To solve a severe structural crisis, both short and long-term issues need to be addressed. However, the political decision-making process is typically not particularly good in handling the long-term issues. The horizon exceeds by far the political mandate period. We all know that painful decisions don't help a government to be re-elected, and that long-term decisions can be torn apart by next government. This illustrates the value of consensus. If everybody feels that they sit in the same boat, long-term commitments can be made. To use a Greek analogy, tie yourself to the mast when there are too many sirens. In solving the Swedish crisis, a key element of success was precisely that, a broad-based consensus among politicians. Over the years to come, several structural decisions were made with broad support across the political spectrum. The public elderly pension system was reformed and was lifted outside the government budget. The system is not fully funded, but it should, because of its construction, be able to bear its own costs. Two important measures were introduced to restrain public spending. Firstly, a public expenditure ceiling was implemented. The second measure was the surplus target. Public finances are required to show a surplus of 1% over the course of a business cycle. Actually, the original measure was 2%, but it has been, since then, after the crisis, changed to 1%. Anyway, these decisions help to restore the confidence, both that of the public and that of the markets. The fact that 3 different time horizons become intertwined makes solving structural problems a challenge. The required solutions are almost always long-term ones, and usually longer than the political planning horizon. Politicians are often working with medium-term tools in solving long-term issues. What complicates things further is the fact that their success is judged by the market, which is ultra-short time span and is need to have an instant gratification. The great American economist Benjamin Graham used to compare the short-term behavior of markets to a voting machine. Paradoxically, the market would probably vote for a solution with a longer time span than many politicians. Finally, what about the future? Let me finish with some reflections on how to manage money in today's environment. As I mentioned earlier, we are not living in an easy world. Bond yields in the core countries are at record lows. Equity markets have been moving sideways with high volatility. Long-term volatility of equities is priced at a level which would indicate an average daily movement of 2% every single day during the next 10 years. Inflation options market are not sure whether we are heading towards inflation or deflation. Clearly, there is a dichotomy of possible outcomes. We still believe in a gradual recovery of the world economy, perhaps at a low pace, but a recovery nevertheless. However, I'm afraid that the path there will be quite volatile. Thank you very much for your attention.